What is up, guys? This is We Love Gaming, and today we are reacting to Film Theory: The Scariest Monsters Living Under Your Feet. I have, on my own spare time, watched Dead Meat, kill counts and whatever, and they did do a video on this movie as well as the sequel, so I do know about it. Honestly, it's from what we see in his video, it's terrifying as all heck. So I'm wondering what is Film Theory going to say about it? Especially the crawlers. What are they going to do? Okay.
Hello, Internet! Welcome to Film Theory, the show that takes you on an expedition down into the theorist cave of wisdom, where you just stalagmite learn something new. Dreadful speleology puns aside, that's the science of studying caves, by the way, today I want to dust off what is, for my money, one of the most underappreciated movies in the 21st century of horror canon, The Descent. In an era that didn't have the greatest track record with horror.
How'd it get burned? How'd it get burned? How'd it get burned? How'd it get burned? Get off the bike. Get off the bike. Step away from the bike.
The Descent stood out for its claustrophobic setting, smart characterization, and horror that didn't depend solely on monsters popping out to kill you. If you haven't seen it,
Yay. One of the rare few horror movies that don't have to rely fully on psychopathic killers or monsters. Doesn't heavily rely on it, thankfully.
Descent is about a group of friends who go on a trip in the Appalachian Mountains to get in on that sweet, sweet spelunking action.
Also, spoiler warning for the movie. Just realized that.
The leader of the group decides that safety and responsibility are lame, so she leads the team down into an unexplored section of the caves, and wouldn't you know it, the entrance promptly collapses, trapping them inside. Someone call Elon Musk up in his house, build these gals a submarine. Anyway, their day goes from bad to worse as the group eventually realizes that they're being hunted by albino cave goblins called crawlers, who are blind and hunt by sound and definitely weren't ripped off exactly by the monsters of A Quiet Place. From that point forward, the movie becomes a frantic race in the dark, winding caves to escape before everyone becomes a crawler snack. The movie was followed 3 years later by The Descent Part 2, a straight-to-DVD sequel which is mostly a retread of the first movie, except now there's a scene where the heroes fall into the crawler's toilet and get pooped on, which is also pretty much what it feels like to watch The Descent Part 2. So yeah, the sequel, not great, but the original Descent is a solid movie. Sure, the poster is super cheesy. Like, I guess it kinda looks like a skull if you really squint at it, but man, the art team was really reaching hard for this one. But it is a movie that has a little bit of everything that you like about horror. Tension, claustrophobia, some gross gore, and a really frightening monster. And it's that last one that I want to focus on today, because the crawlers in The Descent find this really interesting middle ground as far as horror monsters go. They aren't fantasy killers like Freddy Krueger, but they're also not very, very plausible monsters like the shark from Jaws. They're kinda realistic, but kinda not. They seem like the kind of thing that would be a local legend, like Bigfoot or the Blair Witch or the Jersey Devil. And so unapologetic.
Would a shark like the one from Jaws really be extremely plausible? Because it would need, I understand if it suddenly mutated and it just grew over that years, but even still, if they got that big, in order for it to stay big without having small offspring, it would have to also have more big ones, and that would cause a problem for whatever ecosystem it's living in, wherever it is. Well, that aside, let's talk about caves and stuff.
Theorist and amateur monster hunter that I am, I wanted to figure out whether the crawlers could actually be real. How plausible is it that there are blind, albino, humanoid hunters living amongst us, feeding in the unexplored cave systems right under our feet? Strap on your headlamps, use your inside voices, and bring some hand sanitizer in case you fall into a gremlin latrine, because we're diving headfirst into the unknown. No, you stop it, Disney. This is not your theory. You have every other movie franchise out there. I'm not letting you have this one. You had your chance and you decided not to release anything. No, bad Disney, you're on timeout. You give me something better than Artemis Fowl and then we'll talk. To start our monster hunt, we first have to know what exactly we're looking for. We get many good looks at the crawlers over the course of the Descent movies, so we know for sure that they kind of look like a mix between Nosferatu and that worm monster from that one episode of the X-Files. But the movies themselves don't actually give us much of an explanation of what they are or where they came from. Luckily for us though, the director of the first movie, Neil Marshall, has gone on record to provide a bit more detail about the crawlers. In an interview promoting...
That's pretty good. Also, sorry for pausing it so often. I don't really care. Like, I have seen reactions when people like react to something and they talk over it. I don't really like that because then they kind of miss part of it and then they could be completely off track of whatever's going on. That's why I pause it when I speak. But back to this.
The release of the first movie, Marshall said that, quote, "The crawlers are cavemen that didn't leave the cave. They've evolved in this environment over thousands of years, and there's a community of them that live down there in families. They've lost their eyesight. They have acute hearing and smell, and they function perfectly in the pitch black," end quote. I gotta be honest, that is a lot more comprehensive of an explanation than I was expecting. And all of those characteristics are indeed represented across the movies, with the possible exception being the one about the acute sense of smell. One scene in particular shows a crawler nearly on top of two of the spelunkers, but because they stay still and stay quiet, the crawler doesn't realize they're there, which doesn't really make sense if you can actually smell them, so maybe not that one. But the rest of his statement gives us plenty of stuff to fact check about cave people, sensory evolution, cryptids, and so forth. So could crawlers exist in the real world without us knowing it? Let's start with issue number 1, unexplored caves where the crawlers could hide. When we think about exploring the world, it always seems like that's something that just sort of stopped at some point in the past. Sure, those dummies in the 1500s had no idea about how many continents there were, but now we've mapped out the whole place, and that's not true. It's not true in the slightest. Truth be told, there are tons of unexplored places all over the world, and we're still discovering new massive cave systems each and every year. Here's a giant one in Canada that's been nicknamed the Sarlacc Pit that nobody knew existed just 2 years ago. A big cave was discovered in Colorado earlier this year, and that's not even considering potential offshooting caves from the ones that we already know exist. So the notion that if crawlers existed, especially here in the US, that we know about them already, well, it just isn't necessarily true. These unexplored and undiscovered cave systems aren't even in remote parts of the world where nobody lives. Depending on where you're watching this video, it's possible that there's unexplored cave systems under your feet right now, waiting to fall open and expose you to the hungry crawlers underneath. Don't look down. Haha, made you look at your feet. Issue number 2, discovering new animal species. It's easy to think that if understanding and cataloging the Earth is our homework, we've been done for years, but that...
No, that is not true at all. Like, you could see a species that has not been discovered yet and not realize it. Like, I doubt when we become ancestors, basically, like hundreds of years, if humans survive that long after global warming and all that, if humans survive hundreds of years later, we're still going to be figuring out that some stuff exists.
That just simply isn't true. There were 71 new plant and animal species discovered in 2019 alone, some of which were discovered underground and in caves, like the spider that worships ants. You heard that right, and no, I'm not going to explain it. Just this year, there was a new giant cave fish uncovered. If cataloging all the living things and places on Earth is our homework, we're going to need to pull an all-nighter here, folks. According to an article by National Geographic, some scientists estimate that 86% of living organisms on Earth still haven't been classified by humankind.
I would not have guessed that much.
Now, it's true that a lot of that 86% is likely made up of things like rare fungi and bacteria that only live in volcanoes, or weird fish that walk along the bottom of the ocean and look like they're wearing lipstick. Oh wait, we actually did find that one. At any rate, maybe you think that it's just too unlikely that a large bipedal animal like the crawlers would go undiscovered for this long. And for that, I turn your attention to almost exactly 1 year ago today, when a new species of ancient human was discovered inside a cave system in in the Philippines. The Homo luzonensis, thought to have been under 4 feet or 1.2 meters tall, and adapted to climbing trees. And what are those crawlers in the descent again? Oh yeah, short humanoid hunters living in caves and adept at climbing. In 2006, when the descent first came out, these were fictional monsters. 14 years later, here in 2020, we have bones and a species name to show that those crawlers might not be so fictitious after all. The moral of the story here is that big animals can go undiscovered for a long time, especially if they're the type of big animal that kills you when you discover them. So let's keep going down this thread. Say Homo luzonensis, this prototype human, is indeed our candidate for what would eventually become the descent's crawlers. What about their senses? As I mentioned before, the crawlers are blind. If we're saying that the crawlers are essentially these proto-humans, is it realistic to believe that a subspecies of human would basically evolve away their eyesight? Well, yeah, it is more than plausible. There are species of fish and crustaceans that have lost both their pigmentation and their eyesight because they live in caves. In caves, skin pigment and eyesight are just wasted evolutionary supplies. And wouldn't you know it, those species are found in the Appalachian.
I just did exactly what I said I don't like. I spoke while the video was going. But no light, can't see, no reason to camouflage, and no reason to look for things. All right, let's go back.
Evolutionary supplies. And wouldn't you know it, those species are found in the Appalachian cave systems, the same location that the crawlers haunt in the descent. And while totally blind mammals are more rare, they do in fact exist, as in the case of the star-nosed mole. Ugh. As a side note, boy was I relieved to find out that this thing is the size of a hamster, because when I first saw a close-up of this thing, I thought it was here to rip open my face and eat my brain. It's like a real-life version of the Demogorgon from Stranger Things. So, to answer the question of whether proto-humans like the Homo luzonensis could evolve over time to go completely blind, develop themselves super hearing, and lose all skin pigmentation, it is a decided yes. Homo luzonensis has been dated to have existed in those caves 50,000 to 67,000 years ago, which leaves plenty of time to adapt to your surroundings. Now, admittedly, scientists are still unsure about the exact genetic mechanisms that lead to blindness in certain animals, but there is no doubt that it happens to organisms that previously had those senses. Given enough time, enough darkness, enough isolation, it is certainly plausible that the crawlers could have evolved that way over tens of thousands of years. So then, last question, what about food? One of my initial thoughts was that the crawlers would eventually starve to death because waiting for dumb hikers to stumble down into your unexplored cave ain't a good survival strategy. And finding enough food inside of a cave to sustain a human-sized monster would be pretty hard. There's a reason caves are full of small creatures. Finding tons of insects to feed something like a bat? Sure, not a problem. Finding enough food to sustain a mini-human? Now that becomes an issue. But it's also an issue that the movies disprove for me. In The Descent Part 2, Goblin Boogaloo, we see near the end of the movie that the crawlers actually hunt above ground, particularly on deer, and then they drag those kills back into the cave to feast on. That means they aren't relying on what's solely inside the cave as a food supply. And if they're going after deer, well, they don't even have to hunt anymore. There are approximately 1 million collisions with deer every year in the United States alone. So realistically,
That's pretty sad.
those crawlers might be cleaning more deer carcasses off the highway than the transportation department. So many they might as well get themselves one of those adopt a highway signs dedicated to them. If the crawlers have a clean water source, which caves tend to, and can hunt and scavenge under the cover of darkness, resources for these guys aren't going to be that big of a deal. So
What about oxygen? Because I know caves have an entrance, sometimes more than one. But even still, like if you go farther back into the cave, or if the cave goes down and then rises up, I believe carbon dioxide is heavier than oxygen. So wouldn't you kind of suffocate a bit if like you're in specific parts? I don't know. Maybe I know nothing about caving. I don't know anything about caves. So take my words with a grain of salt.
Is that
There we
it?
go.
Did we just check off all the boxes? Did I just unintentionally sign myself up to become a crawler truther, navigating the caves of Greater Appalachia, and apparently also the Philippines, in search of modern-day Morlocks? Stand aside, ghost hunters. Move away, finding Bigfoot. It's time for Crawler Quest to rise up, featuring your host, literally anyone other than me, because Lord knows I ain't squeezing my dad bod into those tiny caves. No, the real killer of this theory isn't the crawlers themselves, it's actually genetics. In ecology, there's a concept known as minimum viable population, or MVP for short, that considers how many individual organisms are required for the long-term survival of a species. It depends a bit on the type of animal. Rat and bugs have small MVPs because they can mate quickly and often, whereas animals like humans with a long juvenile period and fewer reproductive partners have higher MVPs. So what is the exact MVP numbers of humans, or in this case crawler humans, that would need to exist for the population to survive? There are some competing theories among scientists who are currently theorizing about our ability to colonize other planets. One estimate puts the number at 98. Another one puts it at 14,000. So
How? How do you get that big of a gap? But yeah, that's a very huge gap. At either point, if you go too low or even the middle, the middle part of it, you're kind of risking like the death of the entire population if you're wrong, or overabundance from being too high. But whatever, it doesn't matter.
let's hope we narrow that number down just a wee bit before we make that big trip to Mars, shall we? Even if we go with the most bare bones route and say we need about 100 crawlers for our Homo luzonensis to continue on in the cave system, it doesn't bode well for them. The most we ever see on screen at one time is 9 near the end of the movie, and anthropologists believe that cave-dwelling Neanderthals only lived in groups between 10 and 30 individuals. It's pretty likely that the crawlers are below the MVP that they need to survive. So what would happen in smaller populations? Well, I hope that this soundbite doesn't get taken out of context, but the answer is massive inbreeding. Inbreeding in human populations leads to a number of different problems in the offspring, from low birth rates to physical abnormalities to heart failure. But there's one side effect of inbreeding that really hurts the chances for crawlers, and that's hearing loss. Studies show much higher rates of deafness in populations with intermarriage and inbreeding. So if the crawlers are blind and then going deaf, and they also can't smell their prey when they're right on top of them, they're just not going to be able to survive very long. Looks like my cave hunting ended before it even began. Or not, you know, Finding Bigfoot lasted 100 episodes and they were just literally wandering around in the woods with night vision cameras the whole time. It was like Blair Witch Lame Edition. So there you have it, friends. No crawlers in the caves. Go spelunk to your heart's content without a care in the world. Except
No, thank you. I personally will not be in any caves anytime soon, unless, of course, it was made safe by humans. Other than that, I will not go into a cave.
for caves collapsing, extreme claustrophobia, and giant bat-eating centipedes. Happy caving! But hey, that's just a
Scientists find 33 creatures living in a cave that was sealed off for 5 million years. Appropriate reaction. Very
theory. A
appropriate.
film theory. And cut.
I hope you enjoyed that reaction video. I believe in MatPat's theories. I find them interesting. What should I say? Yeah, I find his theories interesting. He does have evidence for them, which is very good. Oh, I just thought of a scene from not Alien, from Prometheus. The one with David, where he says if your thesis is correct. Remember that scene. All right, I hope you enjoyed the video. Like, subscribe, and see you next time.